He didn't say a word, just stood there, shivering, silent, clutching a crumpled piece of paper outside a pharmacy. People called him a beggar. One woman yelled. A man pulled out his phone. A guard started walking over. But not one of them asked what he was really trying to do, and who he was trying to save. Stay with this story until the end, because what you're about to discover may change how you see every stranger you've ever walked past. It was 8:17 a.m. The street was alive with its usual rhythm. Cars honking, crosswalk lights blinking, grown-ups glued to their phones, kids half awake on their way to school. No one noticed the boy at first. Maybe that was the point. Maybe that was always the point. He stood outside the pharmacy on 125th and Jefferson. No sign, no cup, no outstretched hand. Just a 13-year-old boy, bundled in a too-thin jacket, a hood drawn tight around his head, standing so still that even pigeons passed him without pause. His sneakers were worn. The laces didn't match. He had a crumpled piece of paper balled tightly in one fist, so tight, his knuckles had turned white from the pressure. He wasn't panhandling. He wasn't causing a scene. He wasn't even looking at anyone. But somehow, in that silence, the world filled in all the blanks. The first woman to notice him slowed down just a little. She wore expensive boots and carried a designer purse. She didn't say anything, but her hand moved instinctively to grip the bag tighter as she passed. Her eyes flickered with something. Not fear. Not exactly. Just that tight discomfort of, what's he doing here? As if his very presence on that sidewalk was a problem she didn't have time to solve. 2 minutes later, a man with a briefcase muttered under his breath as he veered around the boy. He didn't look directly at him, just gave that half-laugh, half-scoff sound. The kind people make when they think they've got someone figured out with one glance. "You kids are unbelievable," he mumbled, loud enough for Malik to hear. But Malik didn't respond. Malik, that was the boy's name, 13 years old. 6th grade, though he hadn't been to school in 3 days. He used to be the kind of kid who cracked jokes at the lunch table, who ran faster than anyone in gym. But today he was invisible. No, worse than invisible. He was seen, but not for who he was. Inside, his chest was pounding. His lips were dry. He hadn't eaten since the day before, and his stomach growled in betrayal, reminding him that survival comes in layers. But hunger wasn't the emergency. The emergency was at home, in bed, not moving. Every second that passed outside that pharmacy felt like a brick being stacked on top of his chest. He didn't have the words for it, but he felt it in his bones. If he failed here, if nobody helped, his little brother wouldn't make it. A few more people walked by. A man in a sports coat tossed 2 quarters near his feet. They clinked on the pavement, rolled, and stopped near the edge of the curb. Malik didn't bend to pick them up. He wasn't here for change. His fingers tightened around the note in his hand. It was a torn-off piece of notebook paper. The handwriting on it was shaky, but clear. Amoxicillin 250 milligrams/liquid. Used for asthma-related infections. He remembered his mom once used it for his brother, Jaden, during a bad spell. She had said, "If anything ever happens and I'm not here, this is what helps." She didn't mean it literally, but now it was literal and urgent. Malik couldn't dial 911. Their phone line had been cut 2 weeks ago. No neighbors they trusted. And even if he ran to a hospital, it would take too long on foot and leave Jaden completely alone. So he did the only thing that made sense to him. He took the paper and ran to where medicine lived. That's how he found himself here. Still, silent, hoping, and being mistaken for a problem. It had only been 13 minutes, but it felt like hours. A bus hissed to a stop a few feet away. The doors whooshed open. A stream of students poured out, laughing, nudging one another, slipping headphones into their ears. Not one looked his way. They knew the code. Eyes forward, don't make it your problem. A man with a trimmed beard and a Bluetooth headset gave him the harshest glance yet. Stopped, pointed. "You can't stand here, kid. Move along." Malik's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His throat was dry, and for a second he didn't even know what he would say if he could speak. How do you tell a stranger that your 6-year-old brother might be dying in bed right now, and all you need is a few dollars for a medicine that might make a difference? How do you explain that you're not begging? You're begging God. Don't ignore me, the man barked again, this time pulling out his phone. I'm calling the store manager. You kids think the street is your couch. The store's automatic doors slid open from the inside. A woman in a red vest stepped out, followed by a young security guard. She looked directly at Malik. We've had complaints. Malik took a step back, shaking his head. I'm not doing anything, he said, barely above a whisper. But the wind took his words, and no one caught them. The security guard approached slowly. I'm gonna need you to move along, all right? That's when it happened. A hand, wrinkled, steady, dark, rested gently on Malik's shoulder. Everyone turned. She stood no taller than 5'3", wore a faded wool coat and had a canvas tote over one arm filled with produce and books. Her gray hair peeked out from beneath a knitted beanie. Her name was Lorraine Jenkins, but everyone in the neighborhood called her Miss Lorraine. Her voice was soft, but firm. He's with me. The manager blinked. The security guard hesitated. The man with the phone narrowed his eyes. He's with you? The manager asked. Miss Lorraine nodded. Y'all can get back to your day. I'll take it from here. There was something in her tone. Something that didn't allow for argument. One by one, people drifted back into motion, like leaves stirred by a breeze that no longer had business with them. She didn't say a word to Malik at first. Just looked at him. Really looked. Your hands are shaking, baby, she finally said. He nodded. You hungry? He hesitated, then nodded again. But that's not why you're here, is it? Malik opened his hand. The paper unfolded, trembling. Miss Lorraine read it. Then she looked up at him. Eyes soft, voice low. Tell me everything. He stood there, still and silent, in the same spot outside the pharmacy, hoping the paper in his hand could speak louder than his voice ever could. But the world didn't ask for explanations. It handed out conclusions instead. The glances started early. The purse held tighter. The footsteps quickened. A few looks shot straight through him. Others just bounced off his chest like gravel. No one stopped. Not to ask. Not to wonder. Not to care. Malik wasn't saying a word, and that, to many, made him even more suspicious. People filled in the blanks his silence left. Maybe he was dangerous. Maybe he was lazy. Maybe he was just another kid from the projects trying to take without giving. They didn't say it out loud, but it was there. In every clenched jaw, every disapproving squint, every intentional step away. They saw his skin before they saw his eyes. They saw the hoodie before they saw the trembling hands. And they saw beggar long before they saw brother. He wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of being wrong in people's minds before he even had the chance to be anything at all. Tired of carrying a name that no one ever asked for. Malik, 13 years old, 6th grade, big brother. He remembered his teacher once said, "The world listens to those who speak, but what if no one gave you the space to speak? What if you tried and all they heard was trouble?" He glanced down at the piece of paper in his palm. Creased, damp from sweat, ink smudged in one corner. It was the only thing that had direction in his life that day. Just a name of a medicine he could barely pronounce, scribbled by his mother weeks ago, in case of emergency. And this was an emergency. His little brother was lying in bed back home, barely breathing. And every second Malik stood here, seen but unheard, the distance between survival and loss got smaller. A man passed by, shook his head, and muttered something about kids these days. Malik didn't flinch. He'd grown used to being misunderstood. A group of students exited a city bus across the street, laughing and pushing one another, energy bouncing off them like sunshine. Not one of them looked his way, not because they were rude, but because they didn't want to invite in something uncomfortable. Eyes forward, earbuds in. Keep moving. That was the code. And yet the sting still came, like a whisper at the back of his neck saying, "You don't belong here." When a middle-aged man in gym clothes paused, raised his phone, and took a picture of Malik. It wasn't curiosity. It was condemnation. "Smile," the man said with a smirk, before walking away. Malik's breath caught in his chest. He wasn't someone's content. He wasn't a joke. But the man was already gone, posting who knows what with who knows what caption. 1,000 strangers might soon judge Malik from a screen, none of them knowing he was just trying to save someone he loved. And still, no one asked. Not when the security guard came back out and stood with arms crossed like Malik had already committed a crime. Not when a woman yelled at him to go back to wherever your mama is. Not when someone dropped 2 coins near his feet as if that would solve a problem they hadn't even tried to understand. The coins rolled away. Malik didn't chase them. He wasn't here for change. He crouched near the edge of the wall, cold bricks pressing against his back. Shoulders hunched, lips dry. His legs ached from standing. His heart ached from being unseen. This wasn't begging. This wasn't loitering. This was pleading without sound. And then she arrived. He didn't see her coming, but he felt it before he even heard her voice. A different energy. Slower, warmer, grounded. "You okay, sweetheart?" He looked up. An older woman, maybe in her 60s, brown skin, gentle eyes, bags of groceries looped around her arm, scarf carefully tied at the throat. She didn't rush past like everyone else. She stood there, waiting, like she meant it. Malik opened his mouth, but his throat was dry. No words came out. She didn't move closer, didn't press, just waited. When he didn't answer, she crouched, slowly, knees creaking, and came to his level. Not towering over him, not talking down to him. Level. "Baby," she said, voice low and steady. "I've lived in this neighborhood long enough to know when a child's got more on his shoulders than he can carry. And right now, you look like the weight of the whole world is in your hands." He still couldn't speak. He just opened his palm, slowly, unfolded the paper. She took it carefully, read it, then looked back up at him. "You need this for someone, don't you?" He nodded. "Once. Your little brother?" He nodded again. She exhaled gently, not with frustration, but with knowing. "Okay," she said, standing up with a soft groan. "Then we're not gonna waste another minute." She turned toward the pharmacy, paused, looked back at him. "I'm Miss Lorraine, and you're coming with me, Malik." His name. He hadn't told her. Not yet, but she said it like she'd known it forever. And for the first time that day, the world didn't feel so cold. He hadn't planned on leaving the apartment that morning. Not without his mom knowing. Not without brushing his teeth or finishing his cereal or tying the right shoelace that always came undone. It was just supposed to be a regular morning, same as every other. Cold tiles underfoot, the hum of the radiator that never quite worked, and Jaden curled beside him, breathing evenly, a tiny fist curled under his cheek like a folded napkin. But that morning, something was off. Something was quiet in the wrong way. The sky outside was still gray when Malik sat up and noticed Jaden hadn't moved. At first, he thought his little brother was just deep asleep, the kind of sleep that follows a rough night of coughing. But when he leaned over, whispered his name, and gently shook his shoulder, Jaden didn't respond. Not right away, just a soft groan. Just enough to say, "I'm here," but not enough to feel like he really was. His skin was hot, too hot. His breathing was short and shallow, lips dry, eyes fluttering open just long enough to wince before they closed again. Malik's chest tightened. Their mom had left early, just like every morning. She worked the breakfast shift at the diner 3 blocks down and went straight to the hotel for the lunch rush after that. She came home smelling like grease and bleach and exhaustion. And before she left, she always whispered the same thing in Malik's ear. "You're the man today, okay?" It used to make him feel proud. Now, it felt like too much weight packed into 6 words. He looked around the apartment. No phone. It had been cut off 2 weeks ago when the last bill didn't clear. The neighbors on either side kept to themselves. They smiled in the hallway but never stopped long enough to know names. And even if they did, he wasn't sure how to knock on a door and say, "My little brother might be dying. Can you help us?" Malik stood up slowly, heart racing, and went to the cabinet where their mom kept a few old pill bottles. Most were expired. Some labels were faded. But he remembered the one. He remembered the way his mom said it once helped Jaden after a bad asthma flare-up when the hospital was too far, and they had to make do. She had written it down just in case. Just in case something like this happened again. He found the note folded in the side pocket of her old purse. Amoxicillin 250 milligrams. Liquid. Asthma-related infection. She had underlined it. Once. Then underneath. Only if he's hot and breathing fast. God help us if we can't get more. Malik read the note 3 times. He stared at it like it might come alive and hand him the answer. But it didn't. Jaden let out a weak cough behind him, sharp, dry, rasping. Malik turned, rushed back to him, and held a glass of water to his lips. Jaden took a sip and closed his eyes again. Still burning, still too quiet. And that was the moment. That moment where time seems to split down the middle. Malik knew he couldn't just sit there. Couldn't wait. Couldn't be afraid of doing the wrong thing because doing nothing was worse. He grabbed the note, pulled on his jacket, the thin one with the busted zipper, and laced up his sneakers with the mismatched laces. He paused at the door, looked back at his brother, and whispered, "I'll be right back, I swear." Then he opened the door and ran. Down the narrow staircase, past the peeling paint and rusted mailboxes, out into the street where the wind slapped his face and stole his breath. He didn't stop to think. He just knew where the pharmacy was. He remembered walking by it with his mom on days they couldn't afford anything inside. But they'd look in anyway. He remembered seeing the shelves lined with medicine he couldn't pronounce. Medicine that felt like miracles locked behind glass. The walk there wasn't far, but it felt endless. Every step thudded with what-ifs. What if they didn't give it to him? What if they asked questions? What if they told him to leave? What if, while he was gone, Jaden got worse? What if Jaden... He stopped himself. He couldn't think like that. Not now. His breath fogged in the cold, chest aching, legs pumping. The paper clenched so tight in his hand it started to tear at the edges. When he reached the block where the pharmacy stood, he slowed down, not out of fatigue but fear. He didn't want to scare anyone. Didn't want to look like he was running away from something. People were already suspicious of boys like him when they stood still. Running made it worse. So he walked the last stretch quietly, pulled his hood over his head, kept his hands at his sides. He stood by the front door, just to the right of the automatic sensor, hoping the camera above wouldn't draw attention. He waited, tried to catch the eye of someone passing by, but no one stopped. Not the nurse in scrubs who glanced and kept walking. Not the man in a suit who lit a cigarette and walked the other way. Not the mom pushing a stroller, who crossed the street the moment she noticed him. He didn't blame them. Not really. They were busy, in a rush, or maybe scared. He didn't know. All he knew was that Jaden was still waiting. And if someone didn't help soon, the worst thing Malik had ever imagined might become real. He tried to approach a woman walking out of the pharmacy, but his voice failed him. Cracked on the first syllable. She looked startled, then annoyed, and brushed past him like he wasn't even there. He swallowed hard. Tried again with someone else. This time, the man didn't even let him finish. "No cash," he said flatly and kept walking. Malik's eyes stung. Not from the wind. He sat down slowly against the cold wall, resting on his haunches, paper still clenched, heart still pounding. His brother's face flashed in his mind. Those big eyes, the dimples when he smiled. The way he always wanted to hold Malik's hand when they crossed the street, even though he was getting too old for it. He looked down at his shoes, covered in dust, the laces uneven. He remembered tying Jaden's shoes for him last week. The way his little brother kept trying to copy him, fumbling the loops. Like this, right, lick? Bunny ears? Then around. That memory hurt now. It wasn't distant, it was just out of reach. He had to get that medicine. Somehow. He stood again, trembling. Watched the people flow in and out of the store like a river that wouldn't let him in. He had no money, no ID, no adult, no explanation that the world would trust without questioning his motives. But he had love. He had more love for his brother than he knew how to put into words. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep standing there. He hadn't moved. Not really. Not since he arrived. Malik remained near the pharmacy, one foot resting against the wall behind him, arms close to his sides, as if any shift in posture might break the fragile shield he'd built around himself. The morning light was growing harsher, no longer the quiet gray of dawn but a pale, unforgiving glare that made every crack on the sidewalk feel deeper. The wind had picked up too, sharper now, slicing through his hoodie and seeping under his skin. Still, he stayed. Across the street, a woman opened the door to a laundromat and shook out a heavy blanket. A bus wheezed past, brakes squealing, followed by a cyclist yelling at a taxi for cutting him off. The city had returned to its usual noise. But around Malik, everything stayed strangely still, like he was stuck inside a bubble no one else noticed. A paused frame in a movie the world had decided to fast forward. He tried again. This time, a young man in headphones. Malik stepped slightly forward, lifted the paper and said, "Excuse me." But the man walked past without even a glance. Another try. An older woman in a navy trench coat. "Ma'am," he said softly. She stopped for half a second, blinked at him, then frowned and waved her hand in the air like she was swatting a bug. He stepped back. His breath caught in his throat again. Not because he was crying, he wasn't going to let himself cry, but because it was happening again. That feeling, that sick, weightless feeling like he was both too visible and completely invisible all at once. A pair of teenage boys passed next, laughing at something on one of their phones. Malik didn't ask them anything. He knew the difference between someone who might listen and someone who wouldn't even hear. They glanced at him briefly. One of them muttered, "He's been here all morning." The other shrugged, "Just another street kid." Malik heard it, pretended not to. He didn't want to be angry. He just wanted help. He shifted his weight, tried to warm his hands with his breath, and looked through the window of the pharmacy. There was a woman inside, probably the same one who had come to the door earlier when someone called the manager. She was busy ringing up a customer, but she glanced up briefly and saw him. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. Her expression didn't change. She looked away, and that's when it hit him. He could be on fire, and they still might not stop to see what was burning. He leaned back against the wall again, trying to stretch out the ache in his legs. His fingers were numb now. His lips were cracked. He wondered if Jaden was awake. He wondered if his brother was scared. He wondered how long it would take before he started to slip into something sleepier, something darker, something he might not come back from. Malik shook the thought away. He couldn't afford to spiral. He had to stay on his feet, had to hold on to the only thing he had, this torn note with a medicine name and a memory of how it once helped. He stared at the paper, rereading the letters for the 100th time, as if the act of looking at it might summon a solution. His stomach growled again. He hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon, but food wasn't even on his mind now. Not really. Hunger had become background noise. It was the silence around him, the silence from people, that was louder. That's when the next thing happened. A woman stepped out of the pharmacy, maybe in her 40s, expensive-looking coat, phone tucked to her ear. She was mid-conversation but paused when she saw Malik standing there. She stopped, looked him up and down, slowly. The kind of look that wasn't curiosity, it was assessment. Malik, unsure of himself, lifted the note. "Excuse me," he said. "Could you?" But she cut him off. "No. Whatever it I." He opened his mouth to say that he wasn't going to, that he hadn't even taken a step. But she was already striding away, heels clicking sharply against the sidewalk, leaving behind a scent of perfume and judgment. He lowered his hand. That one hurt more than the others. Not because she rejected him, but because for a moment, just a second, he thought she might listen. She'd looked at him, after all. That was more than most had done. He leaned back again, closed his eyes, and then someone else threw coins at him. Not placed, not handed, threw. They hit the sidewalk near his feet. A dull metallic sound. He didn't move. He wanted to disappear. Not from shame. Not even from sadness. But from the exhaustion of being misread over and over again. Like the truth inside him didn't matter if his skin, his clothes, and his silence didn't match what people thought help should look like. He pressed the paper tighter in his palm, fingers curling like fists, but not to fight, just to keep himself grounded. Minutes passed, maybe more. The world blurred. A door buzzed somewhere behind him. A dog barked down the block. The sky grew whiter as the sun tried to break through. And then, a new voice. "You still here, kid?" It was the security guard from earlier. Malik looked up. The man stood a few feet away, arms crossed, jaw tight. Not angry, not mean, just tired. Like he'd dealt with this too many times before and didn't have the patience to learn a new story. Malik didn't answer. The man gestured toward the street. "You can't stand here all day, all right? People are starting to ask questions." Malik's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm not doing anything. I know, but you can't loiter. If you're waiting for someone, wait somewhere else." "I'm not waiting."
Lumen sighed.
Stepped closer. "Then what are you doing?" Malik opened his hand, showed him the paper. Tried to speak. Tried to explain. The words caught. The man didn't lean forward to read. He glanced at the note but didn't ask about it. "Whatever it is, you need to move. Can't hang out here, man." And that was that. The security guard turned and walked back toward the entrance. Malik stood there, rooted, the note still in his hand. No answers, no help, no one, until someone did stop. But not yet, not in this moment. This moment was where everything pressed in, where all the assumptions wrapped around him like a fog, thick and unrelenting. This was the moment when his silence almost gave in, when he almost walked away, when he almost convinced himself that no one would ever listen. Not because his voice wasn't loud, but because it didn't come from someone they were trained to hear. And yet he stayed, because Jaden needed him to, because sometimes love is the only reason a boy keeps standing on a corner no one wants him on. And sometimes, just sometimes, that love is enough to hold out until someone, finally, chooses to look past the silence. She hadn't planned on stopping. She had groceries to carry. Milk, eggs, a bundle of fresh greens her niece had been begging her to cook for Sunday supper. The city was cold that morning, and her coat wasn't as warm as it used to be, especially not in the wind. The streets were crowded enough to keep her moving, but not loud enough to block out the noise inside her head. The running list of errands, the low-level hum of aches in her knees, the echo of a news story she'd heard on the radio about another boy going missing. She'd seen too many days like this, too many years of the same city pretending it cared. And yet, as she walked, her eyes moved the way they always did, watching the people no one else noticed. And that's when she saw him. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't chasing. He wasn't making trouble. But there was something about the way he stood, shoulders rounded, head low, still as stone, that made her stop walking. She blinked and looked again. A boy, young, black, hooded, alone, cold. He didn't see her at first. His eyes were on the ground, then on the pharmacy door, then on something crumpled in his hand. She watched for a moment, not with suspicion, with memory, because she had seen that posture before. Decades ago on a different sidewalk when it had been her brother standing just like that, waiting for help that never came. People had passed him then, too. Some dropped coins. Some whispered words like pitiful or criminal. But none of them had stopped. She remembered what it felt like to come home and find him crying in the dark. And something in her feet refused to take another step forward. So she stopped. She shifted the bag on her arm and walked gently toward him. Slow enough not to startle, close enough to hear the sound of his shallow breathing. She was careful not to tower over him, careful not to come in fast like the world already had. She kept her voice even, kind, and small, like it was carrying something fragile. "Baby," she said, "you okay?" He flinched a little at the sound, looked up, eyes tired, lips dry. He didn't speak right away. She didn't press. "I asked if you're okay," she said again. And this time there was the hint of a smile tugging at her mouth. Not because she thought anything was funny, but because she wanted to offer something soft in a world that had already been hard enough to this boy before 9 a.m. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Just a breath. A small inhale that sounded like a question he didn't know how to ask. She stepped a little closer, crouching gently beside him, setting her grocery bag down with care. The cold bit through her knees, but she didn't wince. She was used to discomfort. What she wasn't used to was the way a child this young could look so old in the eyes. She followed his gaze to the paper in his hand. "What's that you got?" she asked, not grabbing, not demanding, just offering room for him to answer. He hesitated, then slowly opened his hand. She took the note from him as if it were glass. Her eyes moved over the words. Amoxicillin. Liquid. Dosage. Then the handwriting shifted, smaller, shakier, more desperate. Notes from a mother. A mother who had been here before. A mother who had tried to prepare for something she couldn't always control. The woman nodded to herself. "Your little brother sick?" she asked quietly. He nodded once. "She at work?" Another nod. "No phone?" He shook his head. She sighed, not in frustration, but in recognition. She glanced toward the pharmacy. "Come with me." He blinked. "Come on," she said again, standing slowly, scooping up her grocery bag. "We'll get what you need." He didn't move right away, just looked at her, searching her face for the trick, for the condition, for the thing people always held behind their backs when they offered help. But there was nothing behind her, only her hand, extended. She smiled again, this time warmer. "It's all right, baby. You're not in trouble." He stood up slowly, legs stiff from waiting, paper still in his hand. She turned and walked toward the door. He followed. When they stepped inside, the air was warm and bright. The pharmacist barely glanced up. Another customer browsed the shelves. Someone coughed near the back. Malik stood a few feet behind her, still unsure if this was real. Still unsure if she would turn around and hand him off to someone who'd lecture him or worse. But she didn't. She went straight to the counter, placed the note on the glass and said, "I need this filled. Liquid if you have it. I'll pay now." The woman behind the counter looked down at the note, then up at her, then at Malik. "This for him?" she asked. "It's for his brother," Miss Lorraine answered, her voice steady but not defensive. "And it's urgent." The pharmacist shrugged slightly and began typing. Malik stood still. He wanted to say thank you, but his mouth was dry again, and he was afraid that if he spoke, his throat would break open and the tears would come with it. So he stayed quiet. Let her do the talking. Let her stand between him and the world for just a little while. When the pharmacist came back with the bag, Miss Lorraine took it, checked the label, and tucked it gently into her coat. Then she turned to him. "Now," she said, "you're gonna tell me where you live." He froze. Her voice softened. "You said your brother's alone, right?" He nodded. "Then we best not waste time." He hesitated. She leaned closer. "I'm not here to get you in trouble. I'm here because somebody ought to care, and today that somebody is me." He nodded again finally, slowly, then gave her the address. She smiled. "Good. Let's go." And together, they stepped back out into the cold. Not as strangers, not quite as family, but as something in between. Two people the world had almost walked past. And for the first time that day, Malik didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. The bag rustled gently between her coat and her arm as they walked side by side down Jefferson Avenue. It wasn't a long walk, maybe 10 or 12 minutes, but every step held a quiet weight between them. Malik, still unsure if this was real, and Miss Lorraine, not wanting to push too soon, but knowing full well the silence wasn't empty. It was full of waiting, full of fear, full of things no child should have to hold alone. She didn't rush him. The city around them didn't either. Maybe for the first time that day, everything slowed down just a little. The wind had softened. The street was quieter. The noise of the world still moved, but not in a way that interrupted what was about to happen. They crossed 2 blocks without speaking. She glanced over occasionally, noting the way Malik held his breath whenever a police car passed, or how he looked down when a group of teens came laughing down the opposite sidewalk. He wasn't fragile, no, she could tell that much. But he was frayed, pulled thin, like someone who'd been stretched too far too fast, and was still standing out of sheer necessity. She let them reach the next corner before saying anything. "You eat anything today?" He shook his head. "You hungry?" He nodded, barely. She didn't offer food, not yet. She didn't want him to think this was transactional, like her kindness came with a sandwich. That would come later. First, she needed to make space for what hadn't been said. After another minute, she said softly, "You look like you got a lot sitting on your chest." He didn't answer, but his eyes flickered. That was enough. "You want to tell me what's on your mind?" Still nothing. Just the sound of their feet on the pavement. Then she stopped. Not dramatically. Not to force a moment. Just enough to give him a reason to pause too. She turned toward him and looked him square in the eye. Not the way people do when they want to size you up, but the way they do when they're saying, "You're safe now. Go ahead." "I can't help if I don't know the story," she said. "Not just what you need, but how you got here. All of it. You don't owe me, baby. But if you want someone to know, I'm here." He stared at her for a long second, then a longer one. He blinked, looked away, looked back, and then something cracked open. It didn't come out in neat, polished sentences. It wasn't a monologue from a movie. It was broken, halting, hesitant, but it was his. "My brother's name is Jaden," he said, voice rough. "He's 6. He stopped breathing right last night. Not bad, just like shallow. This morning he was hot. Real hot. Didn't want to eat. Didn't want to talk. Just lay there. And I gave him water. I moved him to the couch like mom does when he's sick. But it didn't help. He just kept sleeping. I tried to wait for her to come back. But I couldn't. I didn't know how long she'd be." Miss Lorraine didn't interrupt. Not once. "We don't have a phone no more," he continued. "The Wi-Fi got cut too. Mom's working a lot. She does mornings at that diner by the train and nights at this hotel downtown. Leaves early. Comes home late. Sometimes I get to see her in between. Sometimes not. It's just me and Jaden, mostly. I make him food. I pack his lunch. I walk him to school and back. Except when he's sick. Then I just stay home with him. We can't leave him alone." He swallowed. "I remembered the medicine. She told me once, if something ever happens, that this helps. She wrote it down. She didn't mean for me to go out alone. I don't think she thought I would. But I had to. I couldn't just sit there." Miss Lorraine let the words settle. He kept going, like the words had been waiting too long and now had nowhere else to go. "I thought maybe someone would help me. Like, someone would see I wasn't just standing there for nothing. But they all thought I was trying to get money or something. They threw coins. They called me a beggar. One guy took a picture of me. A woman told me to get lost. I didn't even ask for anything loud. I didn't know how to say it. I didn't know how to make them believe me." His voice cracked on that last word. Believe. And there it was. The real wound. Not the cold. Not the hunger. Not even the fear. It was the not being believed. That ache of being honest and still unseen. Miss Lorraine exhaled through her nose, slow and long. "Baby," she said gently. "I believe you. I believed you the second I saw how quiet you were. Takes a lot of strength to be still in a world that doesn't see you. And I don't care what anyone else thought, they were wrong. Every single one of them." Malik wiped at his nose with his sleeve. He didn't cry, not really. But his shoulders loosened just a bit. The weight shifted. She started walking again and he followed. This time a little closer. "You said your mom works 2 jobs?" she asked after a moment. He nodded. "Yeah. She don't want us to need nobody. Says she can take care of everything. She sounds strong. She is. But tired. Always tired." Miss Lorraine nodded. She understood that kind of tired. The kind that doesn't sleep. The kind that carries children on its back and still has to smile at customers who call you Miss like it's a command. Not a name. They turned the corner onto Malik Street. He pointed out the building, 3 stories, paint peeling, a few mailboxes broken. She recognized it. Not because she'd been there, but because buildings like that had a smell. A story. A rhythm you don't forget once you've lived inside it. They entered the stairwell, climbed 2 flights. Malik opened the door with a key that stuck slightly in the lock. She stepped in behind him, already bracing herself. The apartment was small, dim, clean in the ways that mattered. Folded laundry on a chair, dishes rinsed and stacked, blankets neatly tucked around the boy on the couch. Jayden was there, still, pale, but breathing. Miss Lorraine moved toward him immediately. "How long has he looked like this?" she asked, already checking his forehead, noting the temperature. "Since this morning," Malik said. "But he was coughing yesterday." She touched his wrist, pressed lightly above his heart, then turned to Malik. "I'm calling someone," she said. "Not 911. My niece. She's a nurse. Works night shift. She'll be off soon." Malik nodded. She pulled out her phone and stepped into the hallway to make the call. Her voice was low but urgent. When she returned, she took off her coat, set the medicine on the table, and began to fill a small cup with water. "You did good, baby," she said. "You did real good." Malik didn't know what to say. No one had ever told him that before. The first thing Malik noticed after the door closed was how different it felt to have another adult in the apartment. Someone who wasn't his mother. It wasn't just the sound of a second pair of shoes on the floor or the extra jacket hung carefully over the back of a chair. It was the weight of her presence, steady and unhurried, like she'd been doing this for years and knew exactly where to stand without being told. There was no panic in her movements, no judgment in her eyes, just quiet purpose, the kind that doesn't ask for permission to care. Miss Lorraine checked the thermometer with a kind of calm that made Malik feel like maybe everything wasn't falling apart after all. She placed a cool, damp cloth on Jayden's forehead and whispered something to him that Malik couldn't hear. Maybe a prayer, maybe just a rhythm to soothe the moment. Jayden stirred faintly. His breathing was still shallow, but his eyelids fluttered once, twice, and then settled. Malik held his breath, watching from across the room, not daring to move. The apartment was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak from the floorboards as Miss Lorraine moved gently from task to task. She didn't need directions. She opened a drawer and found a clean spoon, ran warm water over it, took the cap off the bottle of amoxicillin and measured it out with steady hands. Malik stood nearby, unsure if he was supposed to do something, say something, or just stay out of the way. She glanced up at him and smiled, small but kind. "I used to give this same stuff to my nephew. Tasted like strawberries, but he swore it was poison." She chuckled softly, trying to break the weight in the air. "He'd hold it in his mouth for 5 minutes just to make a point." Malik let out a quiet laugh. Not because it was funny, but because someone had given him permission to laugh. She moved over to Jayden and knelt beside the couch. "Come on, baby," she said gently. "Just a little sip. Then you can go right back to sleep." Jayden stirred again, his face still flushed but his eyes cracking open just enough to see the woman in front of him. She held the spoon close to his lips, and after a second of hesitation, he opened his mouth and took the medicine. It was a small thing, a swallow, a second, but it felt like the whole room exhaled with relief. Miss Lorraine set the spoon down and pulled the blanket higher over his chest. She didn't speak right away, didn't fill the silence with noise. Instead, she watched Jayden settle, waited until his breathing slowed into something softer, more even. When she was sure he was resting again, she stood up and turned to Malik. "You did the right thing," she said. He looked at the floor, unsure how to accept those words. "Most people wouldn't have done what you did," she continued. "You could have stayed, could have waited for your mom, could have convinced yourself it wasn't your job to fix anything. But you didn't. You stood out there all morning because you love your brother more than you fear being misunderstood." Malik bit his lip. He didn't know what to say. No one had ever said something like that to him before. Not like that. Not without strings. Miss Lorraine sat down at the small kitchen table and motioned for him to do the same. He hesitated, then joined her. "Tell me something," she said, leaning in slightly. "Why didn't you go into the pharmacy?" He thought for a moment. Didn't think they'd listen. "I don't look like someone they'd help." She nodded. "You're probably right." That surprised him. "But that doesn't mean you stop trying," she said. "It means you keep showing up, louder, smarter, braver, until someone hears you, until they can't ignore you anymore." Malik didn't know why those words settled the way they did. Maybe because they didn't come with pity. Maybe because they weren't trying to fix him, only to name what he already knew. They sat there for a few moments in silence. Then came a soft knock at the door. Miss Lorraine stood up and opened it. On the other side was a woman in scrubs, hair tied back, face tired but alert. "Hey, Auntie," she said. Malik blinked. This was the nurse, the niece. She stepped inside, smiled at Malik, and walked straight over to Jaden. No hesitation, just presence. The room changed again, filled now with a second warmth, not emotional but clinical, reassuring, practical. The nurse checked Jaden's pulse, felt his forehead, asked Malik a few questions in a calm, professional tone. He answered as best he could. She nodded through it all, murmuring things like, "Good job," and "You caught it early." Miss Lorraine stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching everything with quiet focus. Malik watched her. This woman, this stranger, this grandmother in a faded coat with a canvas bag and a worn Honda parked out front. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't a superhero. She hadn't come with sirens or a clipboard or a badge. She'd come with questions, with softness, with the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. She came because she saw a boy the world didn't see, and she stayed because she knew what it meant to be invisible. After the nurse finished checking Jaden and reassured them that he would be okay, with rest, fluids, and another dose in a few hours, Miss Lorraine walked her niece out. Malik stood by the window watching the street below. It looked the same as it always did. Cracked pavement, rusted cars, strangers passing by. But for the first time, it didn't feel quite as hostile. When Miss Lorraine came back inside, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small container. "Brought a little something earlier," she said. "Didn't know I'd be playing nurse today, but I always travel with a backup plan." She set a sandwich on the table, a bottle of water, an orange. Malik stared at it for a moment. "You don't have to ask," she said. "Just eat." So he did. And with every bite, the fear started to recede. Not disappear, not completely, but loosen its grip just enough for his shoulders to fall from his ears and his hands to stop shaking. She didn't watch him eat. She didn't hover. She just moved around the apartment like she'd been there before, straightening a chair, wiping a counter, humming a tune under her breath. Not because she needed to tidy, but because she knew the rhythm of care. When he finished, she sat back down across from him. "Your mom coming home soon?" she asked. "Usually after dinner," he said. "All right, I'll wait with you." He blinked. "You don't have to." "I know," she said simply. "But I will." And so they waited, not in silence, not in awkwardness, but in the kind of comfort that comes from knowing you're not alone anymore. Hope didn't crash into Malik's life that day. It didn't shout or save or rescue in the way movies like to tell it. Hope wore a coat that had seen many winters, drove a Honda that coughed on the first turn of the key, and carried a voice that said, "I believe you," when no one else did. It had been a long morning, but for the first time in hours, Malik let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow might come with a little more light. The apartment was quiet again, but this time, not with fear. Jaden was sleeping more peacefully now, his breathing a little deeper, more even. The medicine had started to do its work, and the cloth on his forehead had cooled him just enough to let his body settle. The warmth that had returned to the room wasn't from the heater, because that hadn't worked properly in months, but from the simple presence of someone who cared. And that presence didn't ask for attention. It moved through the space with reverence, as if even the cracks in the wall deserved gentleness. Miss Lorraine had taken off her coat. She folded it neatly and laid it over the back of one of the chairs like she was settling in for more than just a visit. She moved slowly, not because she was tired, but because she respected the space. She didn't call attention to the peeling paint near the bathroom door or the fact that one of the windows was sealed with duct tape instead of a proper latch. She didn't ask questions about the stain on the ceiling or the broken drawer under the sink. She saw them all, of course, but she saw through them. Malik, on the other hand, couldn't stop noticing them now. Not because they were new, but because he was suddenly afraid of how she might see them. This was the first time someone from outside had really come in. Teachers sometimes asked about home life in ways that felt like checking a box. Neighbors nodded in passing. But no one had stepped inside and stayed. Not like this. He fidgeted with the fraying edge of the couch cushion, eyes low, fingers twitching at the fabric. "Sorry it's messy," he muttered. Miss Lorraine looked up from where she was washing out the spoon in the sink. "Messy?" He nodded. "It's not usually like this. Well, it kinda is. But I try to clean up when Mom's not here. Just, sometimes I can't do everything." She dried the spoon carefully with a paper towel and walked back to the table, setting it down gently. Then she sat across from him, looked him in the eyes, and said in the most matter-of-fact way, "This isn't messy, baby. This is survival." Her words didn't come with pity. They came with clarity. And somehow that was even more powerful. Malik blinked. No one had ever said it like that. No one had ever acknowledged that this wasn't a failure, it was endurance. The way the dishes were stacked neatly despite being chipped. The way the blankets were folded even if they were thin. The way Jaden had clean clothes even if they were too small. These were all things he did with care. They weren't signs of chaos. They were signs of trying. Miss Lorraine glanced around the room again, this time letting her eyes rest longer in certain places. The dusty corner where a power strip buzzed faintly. The light bulb near the hallway that flickered and then steadied, as if it too was pushing through. The small magnet board on the fridge that had Malik's handwriting all over it. To do. Dishes, Jaden's homework, oatmeal for breakfast, take trash down. She stood up again and walked toward the bookshelf in the corner. It wasn't a bookshelf, really. Just stacked crates with a few old paperbacks, school supplies, and one small frame with a picture of Malik, Jaden, and their mom, all squeezed onto a train seat, smiling into the camera like they had nothing to prove. "Your mom work weekends?" she asked gently. "Usually," he said. "Sometimes she picks up extras when rent's coming up." Miss Lorraine nodded slowly. "She's holding it down. That's not easy." Malik nodded too. "She don't like asking for help. Says people judge." "People do judge," she said. "But that doesn't mean she's wrong to need help." He didn't respond right away. He wasn't sure how to. Those two things, needing help and being wrong, had always felt tangled up together. He had learned, mostly through silence, that asking meant weakness. That needing made you a burden. That if you were poor, you had to be twice as quiet and 3 times as strong just to be allowed in the room. Miss Lorraine moved to the fridge and opened it slowly, not to invade but to understand. Inside were a few cartons of milk, half a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and 2 apples. Enough for breakfast tomorrow, maybe the next day. Not much more. She didn't comment. She closed the fridge and walked back to the table. "I'll be right back," she said, picking up her coat. Malik sat up straighter. "Wait, are you leaving?" "Just for a little bit," she said, sliding her arms into her sleeves. "I've got an idea." He watched her walk out the door, uncertain. His chest tightened, just a little. Part of him was scared that was it, that the help had come, touched his world, and moved on. Like most things did. But she'd said she'd come back. And something in her voice made him believe her. So he waited. 20 minutes passed. Jaden stirred once on the couch but stayed asleep. Malik checked his forehead again. Still warm but not burning. That was a win. He sat near the window watching the street below. The same man from earlier walked his dog across the corner. The same blue car was double-parked near the hydrant. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything felt different. Then, down the block, he saw it. A silver Honda, older, boxy, with a dent on the passenger side, pulling up slowly to the curb. Miss Lorraine stepped out, popped the trunk, and began lifting out 2 large brown paper bags. Malik ran to the door, opened it before she could even knock. "Told you I'd be back," she said with a wink. She stepped inside and placed the bags on the table. "Hope you've got some cabinet space." Malik helped her unpack. There were groceries, canned beans, rice, pasta, frozen vegetables, cereal, fruit, sandwich meat, eggs. Enough for a week, maybe more. She handed him a small envelope too. Inside was a note. Handwritten. No fanfare. For now. Until next time.
Elle.
He didn't know what to say. You're not charity, she said firmly. You're family. Whether you like it or not. He smiled, small at first, then wider. It was the first time all day his face had really stretched that way. The apartment was still what it was. Still old, still struggling, still on the edge of being missed by every system meant to catch families like this before they fell. But now there was food. There was warmth. There was someone who might knock again in a few days. This was still the apartment everyone forgot. But today it had been remembered. And that made all the difference. The days that followed didn't unfold like miracles. There were no cameras, no headlines, no social workers arriving with clipboards and long-term solutions. Malik didn't wake up to find everything fixed. But for the first time in a long time, things didn't feel like they were falling apart either. The apartment stayed warm. Not because the heater had suddenly started working, but because there was now food in the pantry and someone checking in, someone who kept her promises. Jaden slowly got better, his fever easing, his color returning, his voice growing louder with each passing day. And Malik, though still tired, found that his chest didn't carry the same heaviness it used to. Something had shifted. Something had settled. Miss Lorraine came back 2 days after the medicine. No warning. No fanfare. Just a knock on the door. A familiar voice calling out, "It's me, baby. Open up." She brought more groceries, a bag of books, and a note from her niece with instructions for how to keep Jaden's immune system stronger through winter. She didn't stay long that time. Just long enough to see the boy smile, to hear Malik say thank you without choking on the words. Before she left, she told him she'd be back again soon. And she meant it. The next week, she returned. This time with someone else. A tall man with kind eyes and a clipboard, who introduced himself as a volunteer from a community center a few blocks over. He didn't ask Malik to fill out forms or prove anything. He just talked to them like neighbors, like people. He asked what they needed, not what they qualified for. Then he gave Malik a flyer about after-school tutoring and offered a ride to Jaden's pediatric checkup, just in case their mom's shift ran too late. Malik watched it all happen like a slow bloom. It wasn't loud. It wasn't fast. But it was real. And through it all, Miss Lorraine kept coming back. Sometimes with bags of groceries. Sometimes with cooked meals wrapped in foil. Once with a pair of gently used sneakers for Jaden, because she'd noticed his toes pressing up against the front of the old ones. Another time, she brought a second-hand space heater and said, "Don't ask questions. Just use it. And don't burn the place down." Malik had started asking her about herself little by little. At first, she answered with smiles and shoulder shrugs. "Oh, just a nosy old woman with time on her hands." But one afternoon, as they sat by the window while Jaden colored in the corner, she opened up without being asked. "I used to work down at the courthouse," she said. "Back when things looked different." Malik looked up from his homework. "Like, as a lawyer?" She nodded. "Civil rights. Mostly housing cases. Discrimination. Evictions. Schools pushing kids out. That sort of thing." He stared at her. "You were, like, a real lawyer?" She laughed. "Still am. Retired now. Don't wear the suits anymore. But I got enough fire left to speak when something needs saying." He couldn't picture her in a courtroom, but then again, maybe that was the point. Maybe that was why she never led with her resume. Maybe that was why she didn't walk around telling people who she used to be. Because what mattered wasn't what she'd done, but what she was still willing to do. "I stopped practicing full-time a few years ago," she said. "But I never stopped caring. I see too many kids like you, baby. Kids with no backup. No one in their corner. And I know what happens when the world keeps walking past you." She didn't say more than that. She didn't need to. Malik understood. Because he'd lived it. And now he was living something else entirely. What no one knew. What the pharmacist hadn't known. What the security guard hadn't cared to ask. What the woman with the expensive purse would never believe. Was that Miss Lorraine didn't stop that day because she was bored or curious or nosy. She stopped because she saw herself. Or maybe someone she loved. She stopped because she remembered. Years ago, She'd watched her own nephew get arrested for sitting outside a store too long. He'd been 17, waiting for a ride. No stolen goods, no crime, just the wrong skin in the wrong zip code. She'd spent weeks clearing his record, years fighting the policy that allowed it, and a lifetime wondering if she could have done more. She had seen too many boys like Malik disappear, not in one big moment but over time. A series of small dismissals, silent shovels digging a hole no one would acknowledge until it was too deep to climb out. So when she saw him standing there, shaking in the cold, holding that wrinkled piece of paper with the name of a medicine instead of a plea for money, she knew she couldn't keep walking. And what they didn't know was, she never had. Miss Lorraine had been walking into rooms she wasn't invited into for decades. Courtrooms, council meetings, PTA board elections. She had been the voice for families no one documented. The whisper in the back row that said, "Don't sign that. Ask for someone else. You have rights." But now, retired and with fewer places to be, she'd decided she'd spend her mornings doing one thing. Noticing. Noticing the kid who sat alone. The grandmother struggling with a grocery bag. The boy outside the pharmacy who didn't fit the script people had written in their heads. She'd told herself a long time ago that she couldn't fix the world, but she could stop for one person at a time. And for Malik, that was enough to change everything. It had been 2 weeks since that morning outside the pharmacy, and Malik had returned there exactly once. This time not to stand in the cold with a crumpled note, but to buy a toothbrush for his brother and a new bottle of lotion for his mom. The walk felt different now. The sidewalk wasn't kinder. The people weren't warmer. But he was different. He walked taller. Not with swagger or defiance, but with something quieter. A kind of dignity that comes from having been seen, and not just seen but believed. He didn't linger outside the store this time. He stepped in, paid for what he needed, and walked out. But he noticed the security guard still standing near the door, arms folded, scanning the street with that same hard expression. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. No words, just a look. Malik didn't nod. Neither did the man. But something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that the boy who stood here weeks ago had not, in fact, been what they assumed. The woman who had clutched her purse that morning crossed paths with him too. She didn't recognize him, not really, but she paused, ever so slightly, as if something about his face tugged at a corner of memory. She didn't say anything, just kept walking. He didn't expect her to apologize. He didn't even want her to. He just wanted to remember how easily people had passed him by, how quickly they had filled in his silence with a story they'd written long before he arrived. Miss Lorraine once told him, "Most folks don't hate what they see. They hate what they expect to see. That's the real problem. Expectations that stick to our skin like glue, even when we're just trying to breathe." And Malik had breathed, that morning and every day since. He still got up early to help Jaden with breakfast, still folded the blankets, still kept the grocery list updated and the homework binder organized. His mom, who returned home each night with heavy steps and grateful eyes, had started smiling more. Tired smiles, yes, but real ones. The kind that said, "We're still standing." Miss Lorraine kept coming, sometimes with food, sometimes just to talk. Once she brought a chessboard and taught Malik how to play. "Always think 3 moves ahead," she said. "Life will try to trap you, but if you're watching the board, you'll see the trap before it closes." He never forgot that. And now, whenever he walked through the neighborhood, whenever he saw someone standing alone, arms crossed or eyes wide with quiet panic, he looked a little longer. Not to stare, not to judge, but to ask himself, what don't I know yet? Because that was the question that had changed everything. What if someone had asked that before assuming he was begging? What if they had asked, what happened to this boy today? Why is he really here? What is he carrying in his hands? In his heart? The next time you see a black child standing alone, hood up, eyes lowered, lips pressed tight around unspoken words, don't fill in their silence with your assumptions. Don't write their story without asking them the first line. Because you don't know if he's waiting for trouble, or if he's just trying to save his little brother. You don't know if she's being defiant, or if she's holding it together for a family that leans on her. You don't know if he's skipping school because he doesn't care, or because he's afraid his mom won't make rent and he's working on the side. The stories you imagine are rarely the ones that are true. Malik was 13, small for his age, quiet by nature, but he carried more courage in one morning than most people carry in a year. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't beg. He didn't plead. He stood, trembling, in the judgment of an entire city, because the person he loved most needed him to. And someone finally saw him. Miss Lorraine wasn't magic. She didn't arrive with lights flashing. She didn't fix everything. She simply stopped. She looked. She listened. And when the moment came to decide what kind of story she would believe, she chose the one he gave her. Sometimes that's all it takes. A stranger who believes you, a grown-up who doesn't flinch, a hand extended not because of what you look like, but because of what you are, a child in need of kindness. So the next time you feel the impulse to judge, pause. Look again. Ask the question. And remember Malik. Because somewhere, another boy is standing outside a store, holding a note, hoping someone will finally see him. And maybe that someone is you.